Hey, what is going on everyone? It is Kyle and we are back with another episode of my programming and web development tutorials. This is episode 7 of my C++ programming tutorials, and in today's episode we are going to be talking about basic loops in C++. So the two topics that we're going to be covering are the for loop and the while loop in C++. So I'm going to talk you through what they are and how they work, and how to create loops in your application. So we're going to open up code blocks, which I have already done, and I've opened up my testing project as well. So what I'm going to do is the usual. We're going to type out the basic skeleton of our C++ application, and then I'm going to go through in a little bit more detail what loops are and how they work. I'm going to include string just in case. I'm not really sure if I'll need it, but you never know. Okay, so now that we've got our main application typed out, what is a loop? And what does it do, more importantly? So a loop is basically a piece of code or a bunch of code within your application that executes something an arbitrary number of times. So an example of a loop within an application would be something as simple as counting from 1 to 10. The way that you might think of doing it when you're beginning out programming is to type out 10 different lines of code that would print the numbers 1 to 10 onto the screen. But within programming, when you've got loops, like in C++, you can actually minimize the amount of code and actually basically automate that, so you don't actually have to go through and type that out by hand. And that's actually useful when you don't actually know how many numbers you're dealing with, and you can't actually physically type it out by hand where it actually has to be done in a loop. So loops are very, very important within programming in general. And yes, I'm going to show you guys how to create a basic loop in C++. The first one that we're going to be starting with is the for loop. So I'll show you guys how to do that right now. Okay, so what we're going to do is pretty much exactly what I just said. We're going to count from 1 to 10, and we're going to print it out on the screen, and so let's get started. So a for loop is basically split up into three main parts within the actual loop itself. So the first part that you provide is a counter. Normally it's a counter, and then the second part of it that you provide will be the condition. So under what condition will you execute that loop? And the third is what you're going to do after the loop has executed. So I will give you an example. So we type for, okay, and then so that's basically the start of the loop. And then just like an if statement, we open up our brackets, okay, and then we need to assign a counter. So in this case, it'll be an integer. We're going to call our integer I, and we're going to give our integer I a value of 0 to actually 1 to start with. And then we're going to actually put in a semicolon, space, and now you need to provide it with the condition. So the condition is basically like a miniature if statement within the loop. So we've got our I here, which is equal to 1 at the moment, and what we want to say is that if I is less than or equal to 10, which we're going to do now, so I less than or equal to 10, and then we put in another semicolon, and then what we want to do after the loop has executed, and that condition is met. So if it is still less than or equal to 10, what do we want to do? We want to increase I by 1. So we want to type I++, and what I++ does is it adds 1 to the end of, or it adds 1 to the current value of I. So if we were to run this once, if you were to just run int I equals 1 and then run I++, I would equal 2, if that makes sense. And then you enter down the line, you put in your curly braces, and this is what you want to actually do inside your loop. So it is as simple as writing std cout and I. That's it. So I will start at 1. Okay, if it is less than or equal to 10, then we increase it by 1. So when it hits 10, then it stops. Okay, and this is actually the condition here is actually to prevent what is called an infinite loop, where you would start it and it just keeps going and going and going basically until your computer crashes. And what we're going to do is have it do a new line as well. So we're going to run this, and hopefully I don't make a fool of myself and I have typed out everything correctly, and we should get the numbers 1 through 10 printed out on the screen. Okay, and that there is done in, what's that, 1, 2, 3, 4 lines of code instead of the 10 that you would have had to type std cout 1 enter da 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 2 3 4 all the way down to 10. So that is a for loop, and that is how it works. And it's not just good for say counting up to a certain value. You can use it when you don't actually know the value that you need to provide. So say if you had an array and you need to print out all the values within the array, you could do that using a for loop as well. Okay, so now we're going to move on to the while loop, and the difference between the for and the while loop. So the for loop has a counter and has a condition. The while loop basically just has a condition. So basically it says while something, do something. Okay, so I'm going to type it out, and we'll go through it like that. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a very, very similar setup. So we're going to declare an integer called I, going to provide it with a value of 1. Okay, so you notice this isn't in any sort of a loop at the moment, it's just by itself. And then on the line below, what we want to do is start our loop. So we type while, just like we did before where we type for. And then what we want to type is while I is less than or equal to 10. No semicolon in here. And then we put in our 2 curly braces, and we want to std cout I, pretty much the exact same way that we did before. So this will print out the value of I, so starting at 1. And then what we have to remember is to increment our integer by 1. Now it doesn't have to be I, it's just the most commonly used one within programming as a variable name for a counter. You can have whatever you want, because if you've got multiple, normally you just go, I don't know, I, J, K, and sort of just work your way around like that. So this should, in theory, if I've typed it out correctly, do the exact same thing as the for loop. So 1 through to 10, and that's it. So that one was still done slightly longer, so in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, in 6 lines of code. So depending on how you want to do it, it depends on which one you want to use. So I don't know, I showed you basically how to do the same thing twice, but while loops are kind of a little bit more handy in my opinion when it comes to meeting a condition. So you can have, like we did in one of our other applications where we had when we were getting user input. Okay, so we create a string called user input, and then we want to print out on the screen, please enter yes. Okay, so we're going to ask the user to please enter yes, and then what we want to do is say while, and this is another example and probably a more usable example of where you would use a while statement or a while loop. So while user input doesn't equal yes, std get line std cin. So this is all stuff that we've done before. I'm going to pipe that out to user input, and then we're going to take that back. Okay, and we're going to paste that there. Okay, so I made a bit of a bodge of that, and I'll explain what I've actually done so it doesn't confuse you. So basically what I've done is created a string called user input, and I've said while user input doesn't equal yes, then we're going to display please enter yes onto the screen, and then we are going to get the input from the user, and basically it'll keep repeating itself until the user enters yes. That's simple as that. So we're going to start it up. Please enter yes. So if I don't enter anything, it'll just keep asking me, please enter yes. And if I enter no, it'll keep asking. It'll keep asking, it'll keep asking until I enter yes. And then the code will execute. It'll pass that while loop and continue on executing the rest of the code. So basically, a good way to think about a while statement is a gate with guards at it, and you walk up to the gate and the guards say, do this, and if you don't do that, they don't let you through. If you do it, then they let you through, and that's basically how it is. So the code will run, it'll create your string, and then it'll wait here until you've actually met the requirements of the loop, and then it will pass through, and you'll go through and execute the rest of the program, which in this case is just return 0, which basically terminates the application, and returns a non-error. And yeah, that's pretty much how loops, or basic loops, in C++ work. So thank you very much for watching, and stay tuned for the next episode.